Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to do a video all about the lines that I use for crankbaits. Out on Lake Chickamauga right now, the crankbait bite is probably the best way to catch fish out on the ledges, so just figured this would be a really good video to do. There's a lot of different crankbait categories, and we're going to go through each one, all the way from lipless crankbaits all the way to those Magnum size, 10XD crankbaits. So we're going to cover all of those bases, and really, what it comes down to when it comes to my line choices is, number one, I'm always using fluorocarbon for every single type of crankbait that I use. Fluorocarbon is just what I trust. I never use braid. I just don't like how braid doesn't have any stretch at all for crankbait specifically. I love braided line and I love fishing braid, but for crankbaits, not so much. I really think that fluorocarbon is the best overall option. And the fluorocarbons that I use, of course, we've got a bunch of different types here. We've got Seaguar Brazex, which I use in situations where I'm fishing around a lot of rocks or wooded cover. Anything that I'm worried about the line getting damaged from rubbing against any type of cover or structure, I'm going to be using a Brazex. I also use Invisex a lot. Invisex is really good for those crankbaits where maybe it's a finesse style crankbait, which we're going to be talking about, because it's a lot softer, and I feel like this line, because it's softer, has less memory and it's not as stiff. It allows those crankbaits to have a really good free movement. So I use Invisex a lot for those smaller finesse crankbaits. And then Red Label, man, I throw Red Label quite a bit for a lot of different types of crankbaits, and it's just a really good overall line that I trust a lot. It's strong. It's not very soft or supple, so it's not as good for those crankbaits that have a really delicate action. But it is a really good line for crankbaiting. And sometimes I use Tatsu too, but honestly, I really feel like if I'm going to need something that's a little bit more soft and manageable, I'm just going to use the Invisex for crankbaits. So that's kind of a breakdown of the different types of lines that I use. Now let's talk about the sizes of the lines for each individual category of crankbaits. Alright, so let's start off by talking about lipless crankbaits. Lipless crankbaits are probably the most, unique of all the crankbait categories. Of course, the description is in the name. You've got no lip on this crankbait. It has a very tight wobble. It works really well around grass, and unlike the other crankbaits, it sinks. Lipless crankbaits in general sink. They don't stay neutrally buoyant or float. So they're very different. They're more of a shallow water power fishing tactic than anything. So when I'm using a lipless crankbait, I'm generally using line that is a little bit heavier. I'm going to be using probably 15-pound test or 20-pound test fluorocarbon. And the reason for that is because that bait sinks, I don't have to worry about the line diameter hindering me as much from getting a bait down to the depth. All I have to do is really either change the angle of my rod tip. Maybe if I wanted to get it deeper, just kind of lower the rod tip, or I can slow the retrieve and get that bait down deeper, or pause it, and fish it very similar to a jig on the bottom with a yo-yo technique. So the line diameter really isn't that big of a factor for me, but because I'm throwing it around a lot of vegetation and cover a lot of the times, that's the reason why I want to go to those heavier lines, which are much heavier than normal compared to the other crankbaits that I'm going to be using. So the difference between 15 and 20-pound line, which are the two primary line sizes I use for lipless crankbaits, is if I'm trying to get the bait deeper but still maintain a somewhat fast retrieve, I'm going to be using 15-pound test. 15 will allow me to get that bait a little bit deeper and still fish it faster. But in those situations where I'm fishing, you know, shallower grass, maybe I'm fishing 4, 5, 6 feet of water and real thick grass, 20 pound is a really good size because, you know, I'm not worried about the fish being line shy. I'm not worried about getting that bait down to a real deep depth. I'm just worried about getting those big fish away from that cover and keeping that bait kind of above the grass, you know, still kind of digging into it a little bit, but not too much to where it's just getting, you know, stuck in the grass constantly and you're having to get the grass off the hooks. So heavier line for lipless crankbaits is very, very acceptable, and that's what I tend to lean to. All right, so next let's talk about shallow diving crankbaits, okay? These are crankbaits that are still, you know, shallow water power fishing type crankbaits, but they're really meant to be fished around shallow cover, you know, riprap, deflected off of wood cover such as stumps, anything like that. That's where a shallow diving crankbait or a square bill like the Strike King 1.5 is going to be a bait that I'm going to be using. And the lines that I use for shallow diving crankbaits, again, depends on the denseness of the cover and how shallow the water is that I'm fishing. If I'm, you know, really not worried about getting a lot of depth out of a square bill or shallow diving crankbait, that's when I'm going to be using the 15-pound test we just talked about. And this is a situation where a BrazeX is a really, really good option because, you know, you're deflecting off of cover constantly and your line is going to get beat up. And if it's shallower, 15-pound test. If you need to get it down to a little bit deeper, I'll go down as low as 12-pound test, but I'm not going to go any lower than that for shallow diving crankbaits. Generally, shallow diving crankbaits, like lipless crankbaits, are very much power fishing tactics around cover. So 12-pound test is the maximum I'll go, and that's only if I'm you know, trying to get my shallow diving crankbait down to the deepest depths. All right, so the next category of crankbaits I'm going to talk about are what I call finesse crankbaits, okay? And they're still somewhat deep divers, kind of medium deep divers, but they're smaller crankbaits. They've got a long bill on them, but they're primarily designed to fish kind of that 8-foot range, something around there. Right? And baits that I consider in this category include like the Bandit 200s and 300s, as well as, you know, something like a Wigglewort. You know, those are all finesse style crankbaits, and really I'm using a lot lighter tackle than I am with all the other crankbaits that I'm using, and that goes the same for the line. And as I talked about earlier, I really like to use InvizX for my finesse crankbaits because it's a lot softer, and I feel like it allows those baits to really work very freely without, you know, using a very stiff line. So I do like using InvizX, but I also use, you know, some of the other ones as well. But really, it's all about using, you know, 12-pound test and 10-pound test. Those are the 2-pound tests that I use for this category of bait. Again, 12-pound test wherever I can use it, because you're still trying to grind into the bottom, and you can, you know, beat up that line constantly. But if I need to get down to the greatest depth, 10-pound test is going to be the choice for that. So finesse crankbaits, Bandit 200s, you know, Wiggleworts, anything like that, that's when I'm going to be using lighter 10 and 12-pound test line. All right, next, let's talk about deep diving crankbaits. And when I'm talking deep diving crankbaits, you know, I'm talking about baits like the Strike King 5XD or Series 5 or the 6XD. Those are my favorite deep diving crankbaits, and really those are designed to get down to that, like, you know, 12 to 20 foot range. And so again, very similar to the finesse crankbaits, I'm going to be using 10 or 12-pound test fluorocarbon for that. And the reason for that is because we're trying to get these baits down to the greatest depth. 12-pound test is a really good option for most situations, but if you're really trying to get those baits deeper, I'll go as low as 10-pound test. A lot of guys I know will fish 8-pound test. I really don't think that 8-pound test is a really good option for deep diving crankbaits because it's such a power fishing tactic, and you are still digging into the bottom, just like all these other techniques except for lipless crankbaits. And I feel like that's just too light of a line and too delicate, and you could end up losing a lot of crankbaits. With these lines right here, you know, 10 and 12 pound test, I can straighten out a hook if it gets jammed on the bottom more often than not. So I have a lot of faith in 10 and 12 pound tests for my deep diving crankbaits. All right, finally, let's talk about those big Magnum crankbaits like the Strike King 10XD and that 8XD crankbait. Really good crankbaits when those fish are really deep, or if they just want a bigger profile bait, man, those things can kill it, man. You can really catch some big fish on it. Really, you know, those are really big baits. And so because they are so big, I really don't recommend you using anything less than 12 pound test. 12 and 15 pound test are the sizes that I use. Even though these are deep diving crankbaits, because of their size, I really think that if you go any lower than 12 pound test, you're really asking for trouble. You know, if you did happen to get a backlash on a long cast, you know, that bait is gonna go flying because there's just so much weight behind it, so much momentum, and also, you know, you're catching giant fish with it. So I really like to use 12 or 15 pound test. 12 pound test can get those baits down extremely deep, you know, close to, you know, 25, maybe even 28 feet deep. But 15 pound test actually will get it down to that 25 foot range, which is usually plenty. And I just feel a lot more confident when I'm using 15 pound test with those giant plugs. So that is the breakdown. That's the whole breakdown. That's pretty close to exactly how I choose my lines. You know, there's always caveats in certain situations that I'm going to be using a different type of line, but pretty much for crankbait fishing, that laid it out pretty much exactly how I'm going to be choosing my lines for crankbait fishing in any situations. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this helps make you a better crankbait fisherman by helping you choose the right fishing line, which to me is one of the most critical factors when it comes to fishing a crankbait, is choosing the right line for it. So thanks for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, comment below if you have any questions, and I'll see you out on the water. Take care. To buy the Seaguar fishing line I mentioned in this video and also take advantage of free shipping on orders over $35, check out 44tackle.com.